I get back to the locker room, and there's the whole locker room basically with my bag and all the tapes. Everything was spread out everywhere. They had gone through my bag. Another mistake I made while being with WWE, and probably the biggest mistake that I made of all the mistakes I did make, and that is the tape recorder incident. Some of you have heard this story. Some of you have heard different versions of the story. I mean, there are so many different fabricated versions of it, modified versions of it, exaggerated versions of the story. But the reality is what I'm about to tell you. Again, going to set the record straight. This is the real story and what happened. But basically, I had a tape recorder with me. I traveled with it. Just a little bit of a background story. My dad bought my first tape recorder for me, and I was fascinated with it when I was a young kid. I used to love recording, myself doing imitations of wrestlers, actors, just horsing around with it. In fact, in high school, I was always the one, and in college too, always the one with a video camera or a recorder, just always capturing moments and documenting just experiences to look back on, with your friends, and just special memories and moments. But just a lot of clowning around and horsing around and just having fun. And honestly, before I even started training to become a pro wrestler, I'd often set a camera up to do wrestling stunts, and you can imagine the amount of furniture I busted with my roommates, just doing different skits and taking bumps on couches and going through tables, and you can imagine. Okay, so I just really was fascinated with just documenting situations, that were special, or just experiences with my friends. So anybody who knew me, who knew the real Shawn, would know that absolutely no wrongful intent whatsoever with that situation. But looking back at it now, and even back then when it happened, I realized real quick how stupid it was. It was basically a joke or a rib go wrong, and it backfired, and it costed me my job, my dream job with the WWE. But I think it really ultimately was WWE career suicide for me, because I don't think I ever truly recovered from that. But basically, in fact, while I was training with WWE, Dr. Tom Pritchard and Dory Funk Jr., they encouraged us to have a tape recorder with us and work on our craft, work on our promo skills, interviews, working on different ideas. You're in the car, on the road for hours. You're traveling in a plane, but especially in a car when you're traveling, you're driving from town to town. You got plenty of time. I mean, have discussions or listen to music or whatever. But I mean, if you have time to be in a car for hours, you might as well make use of it and be productive, right? So that's exactly why I had it with me. But where I went wrong and what had happened was I was traveling with, at the time, Davey Boy Smith and Steve Blackman. And so it's been so long, so many years, 22 plus years, or however long it's been. I think even longer than that. We were up in Quebec. I think we had a loop up in Canada. And so the last couple towns were in Quebec, or the last night was in Montreal, I believe. I traveled with these guys, and of course they like to hit the gym just like I did. And we'd have to eat every 2 or 3 hours, because we just were kind of live that fitness, bodybuilding-ish lifestyle, right? These guys, when you're on the road, okay, and you're on the road for days and traveling, and you're tired and you get irritated. And so these guys were kind of bickering a little bit back and forth, and I just thought they were funny, going like a couple little high school girls at one point, it was like, come on, guys. So I thought, I want to play a little rib on them. I'm going to record them bitching and complaining and arguing. It was all in a fun way. They weren't like it wasn't a serious argument, or they weren't at each other seriously. It was just one of those things like your best friend or your big brother or whatever. But I just thought it was funny to capture them because they had unique personalities. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna capture this, and then I'm gonna play it back for them so that they can hear how ridiculous they sounded, right? Well, where I went wrong was, first off, these guys didn't know me. They didn't know the real Shawn. They didn't know, they had been working with me, with WWE. As far as I worked with Steve a few times. I don't think I ever worked with Davey Boy, but of course I was with the company. I was part of the team. And in this case, I felt kind of like part of a family. I mean, whenever you travel with people, you can become close. They're like your family on the road. Anyway, I was at the Montreal airport. We were all getting ready to leave and go back home. And so I remember bringing the tape recorder out and acting like I was a reporter. I believe it was Steve. I held the recorder up to his face, said, "Hey, how do you feel about the Montreal airport?" And like I was interviewing him, right? And he kind of looked at me funny, and I could tell he was uncomfortable. And at that moment, in an instant, I realized, this was, you know what? He's shut it off, boom, turned it off, right? And then he asked me, he said, "You weren't recording with that in the car or anything, were you?" And this is where I went wrong. I lied. I said, no, not at all. I was just horsing around with it here. And in my mind, I knew at that point, I said, this rib, this grandiose plan joke that I was going to play on them, it is dead. I mean, it's just, forget it. And it was a dumb move. I instantly realized these guys don't know me. And he felt uncomfortable, and I shut it off, and that was it. I threw it in my bag and went home, right? We all flew home. And then when we all gathered back for a few days later for our next loop, I brought the bag with me. One of my carry-ons, I believe is what it was, like a gym bag. I used to have Walkman, like the old Walkman cassette players and a bunch of cassette tapes. And I had the tape recorder, and the little mini tapes is what you use with that particular recorder. And I just kept it in my bag. I mean, I didn't think twice about it. I said that, after that moment at the Montreal airport, the way that Steve reacted, I could see that he was uncomfortable. This rib is dead. I'll just record over the footage or the content that was on it, which might have been, I would say, a total of maybe 5 minutes, if that, But point being is that I just didn't think twice about it, knew the rib was dead, right? Threw it back in my bag, went back home, got back on the road a few days later for the next loop. And then I was in Buffalo, I believe it was. And I was out going over my match with, I believe it was Arn Anderson. Maybe it was, I can't remember now. No, it wasn't Arn. It was somebody else. Anyway, point being is I was going over my match, and then somebody had come out. I forget, an agent or somebody said, "Shawn, you need to come backstage, man. This is pretty serious." And I thought it was a rib. I thought they were joking, like, just, clowning around. So no, this is really serious. You need to come back and have a, I forget who came out, but they said I need to go back and something needs to be addressed, right? Well, I get back to the locker room, and there's the whole locker room basically with my bag and all the tapes. Everything was spread out everywhere. They had gone from my bag. I guess the word had gotten around that I had the tape recorder the week before. That business there's a lot of paranoia in that business, right? But at the same time, it's like, if you hear about somebody had a tape recorder and they had it out, I mean, I could understand how that might have been perceived, So they went through my bag, and sure enough, they found the tape recorder, and they must have played it, and they heard Steve and Davey must have heard their voices on the tape. And that was a really bad look for me, because I had just said, I wasn't recording in the car. And now they're probably thinking, well, hey, what else is on there? How many other tape? How long has he been recording? Like that's when the momentum of that thought process grew, and it just was not a good look for me. And it was a horrible feeling, man. It was awful. It was probably one of the worst experiences of my life, apart from losing my mom and my dad. I've grieved. I've had, some tough times in my life, challenges in life, like we all do. But this was one that was really a big one for me, because I knew in my heart that there was absolutely no wrong intent whatsoever. Attempting a rib that backfired, basically, or an attempted rib that I just was dead, and just forgotten about in my mind. That's what hurts, because I know the honest to God truth, right? But then you flip on the other side. It's like, well, how can people believe you though? Like, that's a tough one. And I've heard some podcasts recently, or in the last couple of years, with Eric Bischoff and Jim Ross and even Road Dogg, Jesse James, who I loved the Armstrongs, but there was a reference, and they honed in and made a comment about that, because that topic comes up about Shawn Stasiak and the tape recorder incident. And it just, they had made reference that, it's tough to really make it in that business if you don't have the trust of the locker room. And I completely agree with that. But then again, I'm thinking to myself, so I ended up losing my job. I ended up getting fired because of that. And that was devastating for me, because that's the only company I ever wanted to work for, was WWE. And, but I had no choice. I had to go to WCW, right? And they, was Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff, and God bless his soul. And and it was Kevin Sullivan at the time. I think he was in office, and it was the power plant. And that's where I met the natural born thrillers, Chuck Palumbo, Mark Jindrak, Sean O'Hare, Mike Sanders, Johnny the Bull, Alan Funk, and they basically took me in. They accepted me. I felt like with open arms. Now I felt that the word traveled. Everyone heard about this. They knew about this. And so I felt that I was like having to kind of prove myself, rightfully so. And I went and busted my ass for 3 or maybe it was a month. Gone up there. I was in Atlanta. I lived in Tampa at the time. But I think over time I gained their trust and their respect because I busted my ass. I worked hard. I was a little more experienced than them because they were real green. I had already had some training with WWE, of course, and the Memphis experience with Jerry Lawler and that farm team or farm club feeder system at the time. And then having my experience with WWE, making the main roster and being on national television. I had a little more experience. So, I think that they respected me for that, but also that I was willing to just start from scratch and bust my ass with them, doing those workouts and those drills and just being there with them. And then I ended up working with them in WCW. And WCW they welcomed me with open arms, how I felt. Bischoff and JR had mentioned that, when you break the trust of the boys, it's hard to make it in that business. It's career suicide. And they are correct with that. But I guess I'm scratching my head. I'm thinking, well, then if that's the case, then why did they hire me and bring me into WCW? Thank God. And I'm always grateful to Vince Russo for bringing me in because he was the writer at the time. I'm not saying I didn't have a decent relationship with Eric Bischoff. It's just later down the road, I see these podcasts and these episodes that come out. It comes up, this tape recorder incident. And then it's like, well, if they didn't trust me, then why did they hire me with WCW? I think everybody knew in the locker room that it was a stupid mistake, dumb move. God, do you think if I could go back in time and rewind and change, would I ever have done that? Of course not. Even though there was absolutely no wrongful intent whatsoever. But it's sad because it really when WCW got bought out, I was one of the first 10 contracts brought over to WWE. I thought, okay, they forgive me, right? They've let bygones be bygones, water over the bridge. Let's start from scratch. Let's start over. I don't know. It's like we could never seem to get it right. It seemed like creatively, it just seemed like they didn't have anything more for me than to do just goofy gimmicks and ideas that I had that I crossed with them and pitched to them, and it just seemed like we could never get on the same page. I just couldn't seem to get any momentum or love and support from that company. And I often wonder, why would they take me back, right? But I feel like maybe I was just the cost of doing business. I was somebody that they could feed to other guys to build up, like the Brock Lesnar's of the world that were coming up. And so, I had my rub with The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin and Kurt Angle with the Alliance during the Invasion angle. But I don't think, I just feel like looking back, I was the cost of doing business. I was just there to kind of feed other talent to build them up. I don't think they had really any real big plans for me. It doesn't seem that way. And maybe I'm wrong, but I feel that the tape recorder incident ultimately, even though they brought me back for my second tenure with WWE, I don't think it did me any justice or any favors. And so that was probably ultimately the biggest mistake that I've ever made, not just in my wrestling career, but probably in my life, because I think it was career suicide with that company. So there was absolutely no wrongful intent whatsoever. And here's the truth of the matter. In the car, while I was picking up the bickering and the conversation in the car, if it had turned to anything that was serious, a serious discussion, something that was, private, I would have shut it off. This was not an intention to capture any personal information, to use it for some, character smear or defamation of character or ruin someone's reputation. I mean, I had no wrongful intent. So I hear those stories, those versions that I was, recording, who was he recording? What was, who knows what they were talking about? Man, I would not have recorded anything that was serious ever. It was a complete joke, bickering, and just ridiculousness that I wanted to capture. And it was just maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 minutes total, if that. It was just very brief, put it that way. Another version that I've heard is that I was so paranoid about people talking about me behind my back that I had the tape recorder in my bag recording while I was, out out and about in the hallway, or going over my match, or work in the ring that night, or whatever I was doing, I was recording the boys to see who was talking about me. That's another version that I've heard. Here's the other thing too. Again, stupid mistake, dumb. Okay, I take full responsibility. I own it. It sucks. I would do anything to rewind and go back in time. There are things in our lives that we've made mistakes that we would go back and change. Some things I've made mistakes that I wouldn't go back and change, because you live and learn. You learn from your mistakes, right? But this is one of them I would probably go back and change, man. I would never have gone down that road. That was, just a dumb move. Okay. I can't even call it a rookie mistake. It was just a dumb move to do, period. But in my heart, in my mind, I was just being Shawn and thought, hey, good opportunity. I can rib these guys and pick them up, arguing and bickering. I'll play it back for them and say, this is what you guys sounded like. In my mind at the time, I thought that was a good idea. Real smart. But anyway, if I was, this is the other thing too. I was working for hard copy. Perhaps I was working for WCW, because I was picking up information and sending it to WCW, because they were in that Monday Night War thing, right? That was another version of the story. Look, if somebody were to have a wrongful intent, or an intent or of some sort that was supposed to be confidential and private, right? Why on earth would somebody throw a tape recorder back in their bag, not think twice of it, and then bring the same bag back to the arena around the same environment, the same people, risking that perhaps maybe someone might go in there and find their voices on the damn tape recorder, right? That's how much I thought about it when I at the Montreal airport. The way that Steve looked at me, and I could just, his energy, and just I knew at that point, I said, bad move, man. Stop recording, shut it off, put it back in the bag. Didn't think twice about it. Went home for a couple of days, got back on the road. Why would I have not? If I had such an intention or an agenda, I would have never brought that back on the road. I would have been the first thing I would have done. Right? Discard the evidence, right? But anyway, point being is, I think you have my point. No wrongful intent whatsoever. Dumb move. Costed me my job. Ultimately, I think it costed me my career with the WWE.